Before you drift to sleep, comment down below where you're watching from. Let's dive into tonight's chilling stories. It was Christmas Eve, and I was freezing my ass off on the side of an empty highway. The roads were slick with ice, the air biting at my skin, and every car that passed seemed to ignore my outstretched thumb. I was trying to get back home to my parents' place after a long semester at college, but this stretch of road was practically dead. There were no lights, no other hitchhikers, just the endless hum of the wind in the trees. It felt like the world was asleep. I'd been out there for hours, and the cold was starting to sink into my bones. I almost called it quits and started walking, but just as I was thinking of doing that, a beat-up old sedan slowed down beside me. The headlights cut through the snowstorm like a beacon, and the car came to a stop right in front of me. The man inside rolled down the window, flashing a friendly smile. "Need a ride?" His voice was warm, a stark contrast to the icy night. Something about the way he spoke made me hesitate for only a second before I got in. He seemed harmless enough. "Where you headed?" he asked, giving me a once-over as I slid into the passenger seat. "Just up north. My family lives a couple hours away," I said, trying to sound casual. The man nodded as he pulled back onto the highway. "Same here. Just going to see the family for the holiday," he said, his voice smooth and calm. I didn't think much of it at first. Small talk, the usual questions about school, where I was headed, how the weather was. But something felt off. It wasn't his questions themselves. It was the way he asked them. It was too curious. I caught myself trying to be polite, but the small voice in my head kept telling me to stay alert. The road was still empty, just endless snow and trees stretching into the darkness. I stole a glance at the man. He looked friendly enough. Middle-aged, wearing a plaid shirt under a thick jacket, his face framed by short dark hair. But the longer I sat there, the more I felt something was wrong. He started asking about my family. "How far do they live from here?" he asked, his eyes darting between me and the road. "A couple of hours," I said, again, trying to keep things normal. But he didn't let it go. "Must be nice. Spending time with family for Christmas? Too bad some people don't get that chance." I wasn't sure what to say to that. "Yeah, I guess," I muttered. The car was quiet for a moment, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional swish of tires on the wet road. Then he spoke again, his tone changing. "You know, I've picked up a lot of hitchhikers over the years." I didn't answer right away. He was still driving, but now I felt his eyes on me more often. I kept looking out the window, focusing on the road ahead. "They say a lot of people disappear around here. Funny thing is, they never really make it where they're going," he continued, his voice almost casual. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I couldn't help the unease creeping up my spine. I forced out a nervous laugh. "That's a pretty dark thing to say." He didn't laugh with me. Instead, his grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Yeah, I suppose it is." There was a pause, and then he added, "But you don't have to worry about me." I tried to ignore the creeping dread that was settling in. I glanced at him again. His face was still calm, but something was off. It was like he was playing a game, one that I wasn't prepared for. The snow had started to fall harder now, and the road had become even quieter. The headlights cut through the dark, barely making a dent in the storm. "I know a quicker way," the man said, breaking the silence. I frowned. "What do you mean? We're not on the main highway anymore." He smiled, but it was tight, forced. "Don't worry, it's a shortcut, a lot faster." My instincts were screaming at me. My gut told me this was a mistake. But I didn't have a choice. I was stuck, and there was no telling how far we were from anything that resembled civilization. Before I could say anything, the man veered off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path. The tires crunched against the snow and gravel, and I could feel the car jostling as it bumped along. There were no lights here, just the sound of the engine and the howling wind. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling now. "Relax, we're just cutting through some back roads," he said, his voice still too calm. "We'll be there soon." But something in his eyes, the way his grip tightened on the wheel, told me this wasn't just a shortcut. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the panic rising in my throat. "Stop the car," I demanded, suddenly afraid. "This is not the way. Let me out." The man didn't respond right away. For a moment, it felt like the air between us thickened, and then he spoke, his voice low and cold. "You don't get to make the rules here, sweetheart." I froze, my breath hitched in my throat, and the weight of his words landed like a punch. My mind was racing. This wasn't just a ride anymore. I wasn't just a college kid on our way home for Christmas. I was in danger. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. My stomach dropped, and I turned to him. "Unlock the door," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to get out. Now." But the man didn't unlock it. He just kept driving, the car now feeling like a prison. I knew I had to act fast. I had to get out of this car before it was too late. Without thinking, I slammed my elbow into his side with all the force I could muster. The man grunted, and in that split second, I threw open the door and bolted out of the car. I didn't stop running. I didn't look back. I just ran, through the snow and the dark, my lungs burning with every step. The man yelled after me, but I didn't care. I couldn't look back. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, a car passed by. I flagged it down, almost collapsing into the back seat when they stopped. The driver, a kind older man, drove me to a nearby gas station where I was finally able to call the police. But by the time they got there, the man was gone. There was no sign of the car, no trace of the man. He had vanished into the night like he'd never been there at all. The police investigated, but they never found him. No records, no missing person reports, nothing. It was like he didn't exist. I never hitched a ride again, and to this day, I still wonder who that man really was, and what would have happened if I hadn't gotten out of that car when I did. I was driving up to Vermont on Christmas Eve, trying to make it to my family's cabin before the big snowstorm hit. The roads were already slick, and the falling snow made visibility a nightmare. The radio stations were cycling through cheerful Christmas carols, but the festive mood was lost on me. I just wanted to get there in one piece. Somewhere outside Montpelier, I spotted someone walking on the side of the road. The figure was bundled up in a heavy coat and scarf, a bright red Santa hat perched on their head. They had their thumb out, and against my better judgment, I slowed down. I rolled down my window just enough to speak. "Where you headed?" "Just up to Waterbury," the person replied. Their voice was muffled, but sounded friendly enough. "Car broke down, been walking for hours." It was freezing outside, and I couldn't leave them out in that weather. "Hop in," I said. The hitchhiker climbed into the passenger seat and removed the scarf covering their face. They were younger than I expected, probably in their mid-20s, with a wide smile and flushed cheeks from the cold. "Thanks," he said. "You're a lifesaver. Name's Ben." "No problem," I replied. "I'm Emma." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the sound of the snow crunching under the tires filling the car. Ben was humming softly to himself, a tune I didn't recognize at first. It wasn't until he started singing under his breath that I caught the lyrics. "Silent night, holy night." There was something about the way he sang it. slow and deliberate, that sent a shiver down my spine. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "what brings you out here on Christmas Eve?" Ben chuckled. "Just visiting some family, same as you, I'm guessing." "Yeah, my parents have a cabin up in the mountains." He nodded but didn't say anything else. His humming resumed, and I noticed his fingers tapping against his leg in rhythm with the song. After a while, I started to feel uneasy. Ben was polite, sure, but there was something about him that didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact, or the odd, almost rehearsed way he answered my questions. We were passing through a particularly dark stretch of road when the radio crackled. A news anchor's voice came through the static, cutting into the Christmas music. "Breaking news. Authorities are still searching for escaped inmate Benjamin Grady, last seen in the Montpelier area. Grady is considered extremely dangerous. If you see him, do not approach. Call 911 immediately." My stomach dropped. I stole a glance at Ben. He was staring out the window, his face completely expressionless. The Santa hat on his head suddenly seemed less festive and more ominous. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing. Could it really be him? His name was Ben, but that didn't mean anything. Still, the timing was too coincidental, and the description matched: young, slim, pale skin. I debated what to do. If he noticed me acting nervous, would he react? I couldn't exactly pull over and ask him to get out in the middle of nowhere. "Everything okay?" Ben asked suddenly, his voice startling me. "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just heard something on the radio. Thought I might have missed a turn." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry. You're on the right track." I forced a laugh, trying to keep my tone light. "So, what's in Waterbury? Family? Friends?" Ben shrugged. "Something like that. Just making a delivery, really." "A delivery?" "Yeah." He patted the duffel bag sitting on his lap. "Christmas gifts." I couldn't tell if he was joking or not, but there was something about the bag that unnerved me. It looked heavy, and I realized he hadn't let go of it once since getting in the car. The next few miles felt like hours. My heart was pounding, and I could barely keep my eyes on the road. I had to get him out of the car, but I didn't know how. Finally, we reached the outskirts of Waterbury. I spotted a gas station up ahead, its lights glowing like a beacon in the dark. "This is my stop," I said abruptly, pulling into the parking lot. Ben frowned. "Thought you said you were headed to a cabin." "I am," I lied, "but I need gas." He hesitated, his hand tightening on the bag. For a moment, I thought he was going to argue, but then he nodded. "All right, thanks for the ride." He opened the door and stepped out into the snow. As he walked away, I noticed him glance back at me once, his expression unreadable. I didn't waste any time. The moment he was out of sight, I sped off, not stopping until I was miles down the road. When I finally reached my family's cabin, I locked every door and window and turned on the news. The report confirmed my worst fear. Benjamin Grady had been captured outside a gas station in Waterbury, carrying a duffel bag filled with stolen valuables and a loaded weapon. I still think about that night every Christmas Eve. I think about how close I came to spending the holiday as another statistic. Small town in Colorado, Christmas was always my favorite time of year. The snow-dusted trees, the twinkling lights, and the warmth of family dinners made it feel magical. But last year, something happened that forever changed the way I feel about the holiday season. I was driving home from Denver after visiting friends. It was Christmas Eve, and the roads were quiet save for the occasional car or truck passing by. The snow was coming down harder than expected, and I was starting to regret not leaving earlier. My car's heater hummed softly as I sipped from a thermos of coffee, trying to stay alert on the winding, icy roads. About halfway into my drive, I spotted someone standing on the shoulder ahead. They were bundled in a red parka, their hood pulled up against the cold, and they had their thumb out. Normally, I wouldn't even consider stopping, especially not in the middle of nowhere. But something about the sight of them standing alone in the snow made me pause. I slowed to a stop a few yards ahead of the figure. As they jogged toward my car, I cracked the window slightly. A young woman's face appeared, her cheeks red from the cold. "Thank you so much for stopping," she said, her breath fogging in the air. "My car broke down a few miles back. I've been out here for hours." Her voice trembled, and I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or nerves. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. "Hop in," I said. "Where are you headed?" "Just trying to get to Fairplay," she replied, sliding into the passenger seat and rubbing her gloved hands together. "I'm meeting family there for Christmas." Fairplay was on my route, so I nodded. "You're lucky I came by. Not many people out tonight." She smiled faintly, but didn't respond. As we drove, I tried to make small talk, but her answers were curt. She seemed distracted, her eyes fixed on the snow-covered road ahead. "Do you want to call someone? Let them know you're okay?" I offered, nodding toward my phone in its mount. She shook her head quickly. "No, that's okay. They're not expecting me yet." Her response struck me as odd, but I didn't press further. Instead, I focused on navigating the slippery roads, the tension in the car growing thicker by the minute. After about 20 minutes of silence, she finally spoke. "You're not going to hurt me, are you?" Her question caught me completely off guard. "What? No, of course not." She nodded, almost to herself. "Good, because some people, they pick up hitchhikers for the wrong reasons." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. "Well, I'm not one of those people," I replied, keeping my tone steady. She didn't respond, and I noticed her grip tightening on her knees. I was starting to wonder if stopping had been a mistake. A few minutes later, she suddenly said, "Pull over here." I glanced at her. "We're not near Fairplay yet." "It's fine," she insisted. "I can walk the rest of the way." The road was deserted, flanked by dense pine trees on either side. There was no sign of any houses or landmarks. "Are you sure?" I asked, uneasy. "Yes, please." Reluctantly, I pulled to the side of the road. She grabbed her small backpack and got out without another word. I watched her walk off, her figure quickly swallowed by the darkness and falling snow. As I drove away, the uneasy feeling in my chest only grew. Something about the encounter didn't sit right with me. About an hour later, I arrived in Fairplay. The snowstorm had worsened, but I made it to the gas station near the center of town. While filling up, I mentioned the hitchhiker to the attendant, an older man in a plaid jacket. "Red parka, a young woman?" he asked, his face paling. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" He swallowed hard. "A girl matching that description went missing around here last Christmas Eve. They found her car abandoned on the side of the road, but she was never seen again." My stomach dropped. "It can't be right. I just dropped her off an hour ago." The man shook his head. "You're not the first person to say that." I left the gas station in a daze, the snow now coming down in heavy sheets. As I drove through town, I kept replaying the encounter in my mind. Her face, her strange questions, her sudden insistence to be let out in the middle of nowhere. And then it hit me. She'd never told me where her car had broken down. Yet, she'd known exactly where she needed to be dropped off. That Christmas Eve, I made it home safely, but I haven't stopped for a hitchhiker since. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed these Christmas nightmares, subscribe and join us for more disturbing tales every day.